Hey family, welcome to We All Need Each Other, the podcast from Transformation Ministry. Let me tell you some facts. Each one of us has unique ways of thinking, gifts, talents, and experiences. Each one of us was made in the image of God. Although those things are very real and very true, it is also true that we reflect the image of God very differently. When we come together with our differences and our uniqueness, we can help each other. We can help each other understand different perspectives and broaden our own perspectives. We can help each other grow and learn and understand the beauty of God and also the complexity of this world. That's why we wanted to bring you this podcast. In this podcast, we're going to get real. We're going to bring in guests that talk about things like faith, race, politics, relationships, ministry, and justice. With all that being said, I just want to say thank you for being here and thank you for joining us on We All Need Each Other.
Hey everybody, welcome to the next episode of We All Need Each Other. As you can see, Aaron and I are in the same room. That's a new experience for us. We've been in the same room before, but just not on the podcast. And we're excited to do it in this format. We're also not going to have a guest this time. Aaron and I are just going to have a conversation, and it's based around one of his favorite questions that he likes to ask people. So I'm going to let him explain what that is.
So first of all, awesome to be in person. I think we're all kind of feeling the urge to get back to that type of, in person and kind of relational experience. So this is great. And really thankful to be here at Transformation. I got the full tour today. So that was the first time I had that. So this is awesome. So you may have noticed in some of the podcasts we've done to this point, one question I love to ask people is what fascinates you? And one of the reasons I do this is because I feel like a lot of times when you see people get interviewed, you hear the same kind of questions. People maybe have something that they want to promote, which is great, and that's part of it. But when we have these, people that are important to what Transformation does, people that are active here in the city, or people that are experts on some of these topics that we've been talking about, I'm always interested in like what drives them as people. And kind of what makes them unique, what makes them who they are. And I think one of the great questions to get at that is this idea of what fascinates you. What is something that you're just so passionate about that it sort of is part of who you are? And maybe one of those first things that you talk about when we all get those questions, like, what's a unique fact about you, or kind of those icebreaker questions, like what's something that just really, really fascinates you. So we wanted to talk about that today for both of us. For kind of two reasons. One, help you get to know us a little bit better. And then two, again, I think it really supports this idea of the mission of why we're even doing this podcast, of that we all need each other. And to me, it's this idea of we all have unique qualities that make us who we are. Every person we come in contact with each day, even if we don't know anything about them, they bear the image of God. They have very unique qualities, and they've got things that they're passionate about that might be completely different than anything that I love or that fascinates me, but that's a great thing about what makes us human. So we put together a few different topics that we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to kick it off. This first one was kind of interesting because Dan and I had different ways that we came into this topic with. I said that I want to talk about movies. Dan wanted to talk about books. I love books too. Dan watches movies too. So, I think we can make this work. But so Dan, I guess books, like what's something that fascinates you about reading a book or just kind of engaging with the written word about?
Yeah. So I do love movies, but I don't think I watch movies the same way you watch movies.
Maybe not.
I'm not really a connoisseur. I can watch just about any movie and walk away with just about the same feeling.
Yeah.
There are certain movies that strike me differently, but books, I don't know what it is about books. I just like to sit and be able to digest slowly a book. I don't I don't read fiction.
Yep.
I mean, I have read fiction, but I very rarely pick up fiction books. And it's mostly like I want to engage with topics that I'm interested in, or topics where I feel like I need to grow or learn new things in. The most recent book that I read was called Terraform by Propaganda.
Yep. Love it.
And he's a poet. He's a hip hop artist. He's an activist. He has his own podcast. He's had a couple of podcasts, but the one he does right now is called Hood Politics, where he just kind of translates what's going on in the world through this really unique way of just explaining to people on a really accessible level of what's happening.
Yep.
And what are all the dynamics of a certain issue. So he's been really like helpful for me as far as helping me understand what I'm seeing and what I'm reading about and what's happening in the world. And this book it's called Terraform, which is kind of like a made up word.
Yeah.
But what it refers to the process of like building a world, basically. Yep. And he keeps talking about how we can build a better world. He talks about things like we are the culture that we live in. Like we are the ones who make culture.
Yep.
And so when you hear phrases like a culture war, like you can't be at war with culture because you are the culture, unless, you know, you are at war with yourself, I suppose. But we make the culture.
Yeah. Yep.
He talks about how words build worlds.
Yeah.
I can't even say it. Words build worlds. The way we talk about things and the way we frame things and the way we share stories and, share information about things really determines how other people will process it, just like he's done for me.
Yep. His
words have helped me understand the world better. And the book is also like kind of chaotic because of the way it's written, the way he talks. And it's also like random poems and song lyrics thrown in. And then all of a sudden there'll be this amazing illustration, just like this random portrait of somebody, like a drawn portrait of somebody. And so it's like, it keeps you kind of on your toes. The book does. You don't know what the next page is going to hold. But also it's just written in a way that helps me just kind of understand what he's talking about really easily. And I love the idea of building a better world, because I think like we can all look at things around the world and say, man, I wish it wasn't this way.
Yeah.
And another phrase that he will use a lot is, it doesn't have to be this way.
Right. Yep.
We can help change it.
Again, that idea of us building the culture. Like
right.
We have a part in that.
Right.
Kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
We can help change it. We can help shape it. And we get to make those decisions. So it's something that I think as Christians, we should really hang on to tightly.
Yeah.
Because we have this ideal of what God wants for the world. We have these high ideas, these high ideals of love and peace and unity. But we don't always live those out.
Yeah.
And so it's a challenge, but it's also really inspiring to say, yeah, I can do something about this when I see an issue in the world that I don't like. So yeah, that was a book that fascinated me recently. So what about you?
Well, I was going to say, what's great about this question is that's one book that you've had such a great experience with. And I feel like every time I talk with you, there's another book like that you've been, reading lately that is really fascinating you. And that's not a book that I've read. So now that's something that I can be like, okay, I want to go read that too. Because actually I tend to read a little bit more of fiction than nonfiction. So I'm always kind of like, I need to read more nonfiction. So there you go. I've got one to add to my list. Now I'm going to flip it over to movies, because I am someone who absolutely loves movies. And I think I've talked about it on the podcast before. I can't remember. I believe I've said this, but when I was in college is when I've always kind of loved movies, but I really started getting into like reading movie reviews and engaging with more of like the analytical side of movies. And one of the critics that I started reading a lot that people may have heard of is Roger Ebert. He passed away a few years ago, but really famous. I believe he was the first movie critic to win a Pulitzer Prize. He talked about movies, he called them empathy machines. And I love that idea, because it's like, so the difference with a book maybe than a movie, like a book, at least when I read books, I'm kind of in my head getting pictures of, especially if it's fiction, but even nonfiction, you kind of have in your head a picture of kind of what the author is saying, but it's in your head, right? It's like you're not experiencing it. Whereas a movie, you're almost pulled into an experience with somebody, right? You're seeing it, you're hearing it, you're feeling it, emotionally. That is a deep experience. Now, that can be a good thing, that can be a bad. It depends on how the artist making the movie is using that. That can be used in bad ways,
Sure.
certainly.
Yeah.
But for me, the good in that is I think it really helps us build this muscle that I think our culture really needs. And based on what you just said, that means we need it, right? Because we're the ones building the culture, right? Is this idea of empathy, of like thinking, putting ourselves in someone else's shoes and thinking, okay, if I was in that position, what would I do? There's been so many movies that have made me, think this way. There are extreme examples, like a movie like 12 Years a Slave, right? That is really, I remember watching that movie for the first time thinking that's one of the greatest movies I've ever seen, and I probably can't watch that movie again. Now, since then, I've watched it again, and it's still, I think, one of the greatest movies I've ever seen. But, something like that, of those of us who never experienced, the idea of being enslaved by another person, is watching a movie going to ever make you feel exactly what that felt like? No, of course not. But it's probably going to help you see it in a little bit different way than maybe reading about it would, right? So I love that idea of movies as empathy machines, as these things that help us go into someone else's experience, even for a couple hours. And even if it's, it's not the same as actually experiencing it, it at least helps you think, okay, what if I was in this person's shoes? And I think that is really meaningful for lots of different facets of life. I think empathy is something that we all need to grow in. And so movies have helped me with that. But I will agree with you. Like, my wife and I always have this conversation of like, I watch movies very differently than she does. She likes movies that are very different than the movies that I like. Whenever we're trying to find a movie to watch on Netflix, we usually give up halfway through because we're like, okay, you want to watch something totally different than I want to watch, that's fine. We'll just watch, The Office or something again for the 100th time. So that's okay. And I've had, it's funny, I've had experiences where like, I'm in a book club with some friends and we were all together one night and wanted to pick out a movie. And I picked some, weird drama movie that I thought they were going to like because I love it so much, and they hated it. So it's like, I have a different taste when it comes to movies, but it really, for me, all goes back to this idea of I want to try to, consider this experience, or consider, what this artist is trying to say. So the next topic I want to talk about was nature. Okay. And I love nature. It's something that fascinates me because it helps me build this muscle of what I would say is having eyes to see and ears to hear. So part of it is I grew up with a mom who loved gardening and just loved nature. She still does. She's an avid birder. She has her own garden. And so she kind of instilled that in me. Both of my grandfathers, they've since passed away, both of them, but they both were very active gardeners. I remember my dad's dad, had this little plot in their backyard where he would plant corn and lots of different stuff. So it's like I always grew up around people that were gardening and just loved nature. My grandma on my mom's side, she's still alive, and she is just cares about the environment. Like, it's a deep passion of hers. And so I just sort of grew up around people who took very seriously, what the Bible talks about, when we're being stewards of the planet and kind of what God has given us here. So for me, that's like when I walk outside and see a beautiful sunrise or sunset, it's like, okay, that might be something that a lot of people notice in their average day, but do a lot of people notice that there's this unique type of bird that just landed on their windowsill, right? Like, there are all these beautiful things that happen during the day, and sometimes we just bypass it, and I think noticing those little moments of beauty for me is sort of what that notion of having eyes to see and ears to hear is about. And for me, then that carries through to all aspects of life, right? Because it's like, again, we're talking about we all need each other. We all have these unique things that make us who we are. Noticing that is important, not just bypassing, the people that we go past, every day on the street, or the people that we work with that maybe we're just used to having a little small talk with when we could go a little deeper. It's things like that of, are we really looking for those opportunities around? Are we really looking for that spark of God's nature in other people, or are we just kind of going through our day? And I'm preaching to myself here as much as anybody, right? Because like it, especially as we get into adult life, I feel like it's easier to just sort of go through the motions and kind of do our thing, and so that's why I love spending time around kids and like toddlers, even when they're outside, because like you look at when they look at nature, right? It's like, oh my god, look at everything around me, right? And like to me that is, and the Bible, repeatedly Jesus talks about children and their importance in the kingdom, right? And to me that's part of it, because they have eyes to see and ears to hear. They're looking around at everything and noticing it and taking it in, observing it. And I think there's something to learn from that for us who are a little bit older. We can pause, we can look around, at the people and the places around us and recognize the beauty. And for me, nature is a big part of that. Now, both of us have been doing the gardening thing, so I'd love to hear more from you about what that's been like, because that's been another way for me to kind of engage with nature. But you just had a good tomato harvest, so you're doing better than I am. So how's that been?
Well, I grew up with people in my life who gardened as well. I grew up kind of out in the country, southern Michigan, and just always loved being out in nature, whether I was just riding my bike or whether I was digging in the dirt or helping my dad chop wood or picking stuff out of the garden, whatever it was. I loved being outside and still love it. Although I'm more of a city dweller now. I still love to be able to get out into nature a little bit. And I think it is that, you said the spark, the divine spark maybe is what you said, but it's kind of like getting your hands on like something that God made. Even though we're all things that God made, but like it's kind of remembering like God made all of this. And he made it for us. And so we have a responsibility to steward it well, but also just to enjoy it. And I think that's important too, because like you said, as adults, we can often like overlook things and we just kind of get used to things. And we forget how incredible certain things are. So I planted this little tiny garden in my backyard this year. All I planted was onions and peppers and tomatoes. And my tomato plants have gone crazy. I can hardly even like manage my way around them to like reach in and grab a tomato out. But yeah, that's been really fun. All of what creation is and the way God made things, it's fascinating.
It is.
And it makes you, at least for me, it makes me feel more connected to God.
Absolutely.
Like I'm understanding him a little bit better and seeing, just like, we were talking about books and movies, like there's an artist that's creating those things. There's someone who's creating those things. And so part of them is going into that work. And so whatever it is that we're looking at out of nature, a part of God is in that.
Absolutely.
And so if we miss that, we're missing a part of God. And it does bring it back to why we all need each other, because we all have different experiences and we're all seeing different parts of God. And I can share with you what I've seen through nature or what I've read in a book, or you can share with me about movies and your garden experience. And it's all, even though we may not be talking about God every second of the conversation, we are talking about God, because he created all of it, and he's allowing us to know him better through his creation. And I just think it's such a valuable thing. And honestly, the whole idea of we all need each other is really about, it's not just about I need you and you need me. It's we want to know God more.
We all need,
and we need each other to do that. because we're limited in what we know and what we can see and what we experience. So
Yeah.
I think it's nature is just this vast, almost unlimited resource to connect with God and to relax.
Yep.
And just breathe a little bit.
I just wanted to pause right here and say thank you. Thank you for joining us and being here with us on the We All Need Each Other podcast. If you want to support us, please don't hesitate to stop by our website, www.transformation58.com/give. Thanks. We all need each other.
So another one of the topics that we talked about, which I think for you and I is maybe an initial one that pops up because we met by playing basketball together, right? Sports is another one that, I think a lot of people, if you ask them what fascinates you or what's something that you're really interested in, that might be a quick one that pops up. But sort of, I guess, to go along this theme of kind of what we've been talking about, I think sports is another one where there are a lot of great lessons to learn. So I guess what's something that fascinates you about sports, or like why is that something that you love? Maybe what sports are your favorites? Like, how do you kind of get connected in with that?
I grew up playing sports from just about as early as I can remember, whether it was just playing in the backyard or, I started playing Little League, I think, when I was probably 8 or 9, just like a lot of kids. And then it became basketball after that. Like I said, I grew up in Michigan. And so I think, I'm trying to remember the timeline, but the Fab Five at Michigan, Chris Webber and those guys. I used to have a blog, and I wrote at one point that the Fab Five changed my life. Because I saw them and the way they played and like how much fun they were having playing basketball. And I just decided basketball was my sport from that point on. Well, unfortunately, baseball was the sport I was better at. Basketball, I was decent, but not very good.
I was going to say, playing basketball against you, baseball's the sport you're better at. You must have been pretty good at baseball.
I got better as an adult. But from then on, my focus was really basketball. I played golf too in high school. And I've played, kind of recreational sports, volleyball, and I played softball as an adult. So I just always loved sports. My wife is a volleyball coach at Bethel University, and so sports are still a big part of my life. The Olympics have been fascinating me. I've always been fascinated by the Olympics. Just to know that these are the best in the world at what they do is just incredible. And I saw a tweet. It was from Propaganda, actually. And he said, I think the Olympics should consider having regular people compete alongside the Olympic athletes, just so we can all see how good they are at what they do. Like, imagine me out there trying to run the 100 against these guys.
Or the 400 hurdle race that was just insane the other day. Like, if I was running that, first of all, I wouldn't be able to jump over the hurdles. Like that, that'd be hilarious to watch probably, but
So just to know that these people are just the best. They're just the best that there ever, that there is right now. And some of them are the best there ever was. Like watching Usain Bolt when he was running was just one of my favorite things in the world, because nobody's ever done it like that. And so to know that there's just one guy who has like surpassed everybody else that ever lived. And who knows, somebody will probably come along someday that might be faster than Usain Bolt, but for now, he's the greatest of all time.
That's amazing.
And to know that we got to see that, and to know that he worked hard for that. Some of it was natural gifts, but a lot of it was practice and dedication and discipline. And to see that you can just achieve amazing things is so fun to watch. I want to know what's going on with you with sports, because I know I don't know all the details about the Cubs. But I know there's been some heartbreak.
It's been sad lately, So, I'm a big Cubs fan, and if people aren't baseball fans, they just traded away like half the team, all the main players that helped them win the World Series a couple years ago. So, I guess a big through line for me, because I've been a pretty diehard fan of a couple different teams. So the Cubs are kind of my team. That my mom's maiden name actually is Wrigley, not the Wrigleys, unfortunately. but my grandpa was a big Cubs fan. He would listen on the radio, and just was a fan through thick and thin, kind of. And he sort of passed that along to me. And yeah, for a long time now, I've been a big Cubs fan. When I was a kid, like young kid, before I really liked baseball, though, my first love was Indianapolis Colts football when Peyton Manning was there. And my brother and I we were die hard. We would watch every game, knew all the stats. We would actually, our thing was, this will date me a little bit. The people watching and listening to this podcast may not remember what a VCR is, but back then we had a VCR and we would actually record all the Colts games so we could watch film like Peyton. So yeah, that was sort of my first foray into being a big fan. But I guess what I'm getting is a through line for me has sort of been like, what does it mean to be a fan, and like how big of a piece of your life does that take up? I'll never forget. So I went to a tiny little private Christian school here in South Bend area, and there was one time that we would have chapel every Thursday, and the speaker was talking about having idols. And he said, there are lots of different. I'm not talking about like a wooden, statue. Like there's lots of different things could be idols. He's like, sports could be one of them. And everybody sitting in my row turned and looked at me, and I'm just like, okay, thanks, guys. But because back then I had this ritual of whenever the Colts lost in the playoffs, which unfortunately happened a lot because they would always play the Patriots and they would always lose. I would wear all black to school next day. So I was a little too into it probably. But yeah, learning kind of, okay, that's maybe one side of it, but having this deep love for a team and like being loyal and like sticking through thick and thin, like even if they're having a really bad year, still being loyal and being a fan, like there's a lot of good things I think that you can learn from that. Even if at times maybe I took it a little too far. So no, that's been something that I think I've been, it's fun, and I've always kind of loved sports.
Oh, what's our next topic?
So this one is another one of like, when you talk about like stuff that fascinates you, I feel like to this point, we've been talking about like lots of different types of senses, right? Like we're looking, we're feeling, we're playing sports, like it's our full body. For me, in my head, one of the things that fascinates me the most is history. Like I love learning about local history. Lately has been a big one for me. Like what happened here in South Bend. There's so much fascinating stuff about this unique community. But even like world history, U.S. history, that was always like one of my favorite subjects in school. And to this day, it's still so. Like I said earlier that I usually read fiction, but then usually the nonfiction books that I've read have been like a biography about some historical figure or some historical book of some kind. So I would love to hear, like, is that, because again, I know you've read a lot about, again, nonfiction, and I think you've done some historical reading. Like, is that something for you that is fascinating to learn about history, or like how do you, what's your entry point into that part of the discussion?
Yeah, so I would say for me, like history was never a subject that I really enjoyed that much in high school and even in college. It just didn't, for whatever reason, I didn't have a lot of interest in it. The older I get and the more I learn about like kind of the issues that are happening now, and you can trace some of those things back to things that have happened in our past, it becomes more and more fascinating to me. Jamar Tisby, who was a guest on the podcast, he's a historian, and he's one that really kind of sparked my interest in history. Because the way he looks at it and connects it to the present. So for me, that aspect of history is really fascinating. What happened 200 years ago can still have effects today.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's just amazing to me. It's another way of seeing how we are really connected to people. Not always intentionally, but our actions have effects on other people, and can continue through years. I would love to learn more about our local history. I think for me especially, I would love to learn about the indigenous people that were here. I don't want to mess this up, but I believe it's the Potawatomi.
Yep.
And I just would love to learn more about their history, about their culture, about the way they lived on the land that we have now. I would love to learn about the sad parts that come along with that of why they don't have the land anymore, why we and businesses and municipalities have the land. I would love to learn that because I believe that still has effects today.
Absolutely.
And I also love to think about what's our place in history.
Yeah.
So I think, again, Jamar Tisby, when I interviewed him for the podcast, he was talking about how he just believes we're kind of in this modern day civil rights era. And that just fascinates me to think, like, how do you know? And can we know now, or are we going to have to wait 50 years to know whether he was right? And that makes me think, what are people going to think about us in 50 to 100 years when they look back on the 2000 teens, the 2020s, and all that's been happening? In 50 to 100 years, how are people going to look at this time in history? To me, that's fascinating.
It is, yeah.
Because again, we get to determine some of that.
Right.
Like we have a say in some of that, especially as part of the body of Christ. I think that we have a responsibility to try to leave this world better than when we found it.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that that's going to be true of us right now. I don't know if people look back and go, they really improved things, or if they'll look back and go, man, they kind of screwed some things up.
Right.
It'll probably be both. But I would like to try to do everything I can to make people say, man, they did some really good things in that generation or in that era. This is a challenge for me. I'm glad that you brought up history because it's something I've been thinking about for a long time, but I haven't taken any steps on is learning about the Potawatomi, learning about indigenous people in this area and the legacy that they've left. And I just want to understand that.
Absolutely.
Because I think there's so much value and beauty in that. And I think there's a lot for us to learn from their culture. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too, one thing that is important for me is like we say history, and I think maybe people listening to this, you automatically think of like books in school, right? Or like learning about history at school, which can maybe feel a little stuffy to people, or that's not maybe everybody's favorite thing. And frankly, I still love that side of history too, but that's because I've always been a little bit of a nerd. But I think too, like when I say history, it's like local people who lived here locally before me, but also it's like family history. It's like ancestors, or it's like for me, one that's very deeply important to me. I had my dad's mom, my grandma on my dad's side. She passed away a couple of years ago, and I was very close with her. My brother and I would be over at her house, on a lot of weekends growing up, and she just instilled a lot of things in my life. But even just remembering her and thinking about the things that she taught me. To me, that's my family history, right? Like that's the history I carry with me. And after her funeral, one of the things that, different family members, got different things from like her apartment and just sort of different mementos. And one of the things that we have in our house from her are these notebooks that she used to write in. And a lot of it is like, she would go to church every week and she would write sermon notes, so it's like her sermon notes from her pastor from years and years. And it's stuff like that is history to me, right? It's, when I'm having a rough day, a lot of times I'll go back to those notebooks and see, oh, wow, my grandma dealt with some of these worries and doubts, or she wrote about having a tough day and still being thankful for things in her life, even when, some other aspects of her life maybe felt bad, or, that's history too, and has been a very impactful thing for me, just, and I think that's something maybe that people don't always associate with the word history, but I think all of us, our family members, our ancestors, the people who have sort of laid the groundwork for where we are in life are important to us, and learning from them. I don't know. For me, that's just been. I look at all the people who have sort of given me, a leg up in life, or kind of said, "Here you go, Aaron. Here's a little piece of the pie. Go and do something with it." Right? Like, I've been given so much, and like learning from all those people, I think is how I grow, and I think how all of us can kind of grow. So yeah, I'm fascinated by like the nerdy history stuff too, but I think there's other ways we can look at history. But yeah, all the stuff you just said, I think is fascinating, of like who gets to write our history, right? Like that's one that maybe we don't always think about, but yeah, it's like there are these little nooks and crannies of history that we don't really talk about, but that are really important. Yeah, like I mean, the Potawatomi tribe here, that would be a great example of, have we talked as a local community enough about, their experiences? Probably not, and who's writing that history? It's people generally that are the quote unquote winners of history, right? That get to write it, right? Like the people that paint themselves in the best picture when maybe they didn't always do the best things, right? Like that's sort of the dark side of history that I think sometimes we need to think about. I think a lot of my fascination with history, especially in my adult life, has been, whoa, there's all these stories that I was never told, and all this history that I didn't know about, but that in a lot of ways shaped who I am today, even though I didn't know about it, right? Like it created, if earlier you were talking about like we create the culture that we're in, like some of the forces that created the culture we're in, we may not have even known about, but like it's impacting us today, and that's history. Learning about that's history. So like all of that kind of stuff fascinates me. And again, I feel like the theme of what we're talking about today is sort of we can learn so much from the people and the places and the things that are around us every day. And it's just sort of being open to learning about that and seeing, what fascinates us, but then what fascinates other people that might be different than what fascinates us. And we can learn a lot from that. So yeah, this, again, I think this conversation has been great. And this is exactly why I love this question, because I feel like it always opens up new avenues of, you never know where it's going to go, but everybody is fascinated by something and is passionate about something. And it, I love hearing about that.
Yeah. I feel like I know you better.
Well, that's a good thing. Yeah, no, definitely. I feel like the same. I know a different slice of your life than I knew before. And again, I think, to bring it back to this podcast and sort of the heart of what we do, it's like the more you learn about someone, I think the more you realize that we do really all need each other. And then, like you were saying before, it's not just sort of that transaction that happens between us, right? Like it's not just, oh, I learned more about you and now I feel better. There's that part of it. But then there's, okay, now because we both are seeing how much we need each other, it's like, okay, now we're seeing how we're both created in God's image. We're learning more about God. It's this other side of it too that happens. And I think that can happen in every interaction every day. And, one of the things we would love to hear from everyone out there too, of things that fascinate you. So, we're going to post this on the Transformation website. So please let us know what fascinates you. And we'd love to, again, learn more about you and maybe have fodder for another podcast episode later. So,
yeah. Thanks, man.